What's up, everybody? This is Frank from Fam Sports New York, and this is our Week 1 summary. I want to thank you guys, Patreon community, once again. I really appreciate you guys for tuning in and watching. And what we're going to be doing in this video, if you haven't, or you're a new Patreon member, or if you didn't see last week, is we're going to go over all the games. I'll give kind of my input on the games that I was able to watch, the games that I kind of analyzed from the sideline, what I saw. And, really appreciate you guys as always. Love giving kind of like my blunt responses here. And, I love football. I love being honest with you guys. And I want to showcase some of these kids, some of the bad things I've seen as well. So can't always be good, but always appreciate you guys. And I do apologize for how I look and sound. I've been sick. Things have been just kind of all over the place. Energy hasn't been great. And we have a short week too. And has been one of the worst football weekends when it comes to storms that I think I can remember for a long time. So many games playing and then getting moved, delayed, pushed down the line. I mean, we had Hastings at Rhinebeck that got postponed to 9-19. We had Croton Harmon versus Hen Hud. Croton Harmon's up 6-0. That also got pushed to 9-19. We had games moved to different days, and that's really hard on the coaching staff and the kids. I mean, that's really difficult to just get ready for a game. It takes a lot of energy, both physically and mentally, and then you have to do it again the next day. It's really difficult. And we saw a lot of interesting things this week in football. I kind of talked about the Blindberg thing on a separate video, but let's dive into all this stuff here. We got about 27 games. I'll try to run through it, give each one of them. There is no order. So the first one I want to talk about is an A matchup. Greeley, who's now 1-1 at Fox Lane, who's 1-0. Fox Lane won 27-6. This is a non-league rival game. And let's just start with Greeley. What killed Greeley, watching this game was the turnovers. The turnovers really hurt them. They have a couple INTs, a special teams turnover. And then defensively, the ability to stop the run was a tough one for them. They were getting pushed around a little bit up front. They were missing a bunch of tackles. I mean, quarterback Osh had a nice passing touchdown, which it was supposed to be a screen, but ended up bombing it over to Blakesley, who received it in the end. And they were moving the ball relatively well, but just the turnovers really killed them and the big negative plays. But looking at Fox Lane offensively, they had over 400 yards. They were really rolling. Big kudos to the offensive line, really dominated up front. And Declan Connors, their running back, over 200 yards on the ground and a touchdown. He also had an INT. He was phenomenal for them. Huge, big boost for them running the football. Max Travis had a touchdown. Theo Friedman had a touchdown and 13 tackles. Super active two-way player. Their quarterback, John Cernick, 7 of 8, 85 yards. Didn't have to pass it a lot. He did a lot of the damage running the football, but he also had a touchdown to Will Rudolph. And James Minotti, super active on the defensive side at 13 tackles. Really was all over the field and also had an INT. Really big win for Fox Lane, kind of dominating. Interested to see now next week. We'll talk about, again, we don't have a preview this week, but I think playing Somers at home, that's going to be a nice test for him. Let's go to the next game. One of the bigger surprises, and I mentioned it on the preview for those that watched it, Suffern at New Rochelle, and Suffern winning 23-6. I said keep an eye on this game. I picked New Rochelle, but I thought this game was going to be very close, and Suffern really made a statement. Looking at New Rochelle, this has been their first 0-2 start in a long time, and they're figuring things out on the offensive side and up front, and that's really where the struggles lie at the moment. Defense, I thought, played relatively well, although they gave up a couple big rushes, including one long rushing touchdown. But in the pass game, I thought they held up relatively well. But trying to figure things out offensively, trying to figure things out up front, that's kind of the big Achilles heel for New Rochelle right now. We'll see if they can turn it around. But looking at Suffern, right, huge victory for them. A couple years back, they beat New Rochelle when they had that stud running back in Lubin. But here, Jep Joseph is someone who really came onto the scene. He was someone I talked about on the team previews. 125 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. Mason Palumbo was somebody who we wanted to see a big growth from him. He had a passing touchdown to Finnegan Mitchell. Cam Lou had a big reception. It was like 22-yard reception to help set things up. So offensively, they did enough. Brady Snell also had a 30-yard field goal, but you got to give a major kudos for their ability to run the football, and that's with the guys up front. Guys like Shane Stallcup, Ben Ryan, I mean, those guys were beating up people up front, and that's kind of when Suffern beat New Rochelle last time, that's where they really dominated, right, in the trenches. And so this was a really strong performance in the trenches from them. Kudos to Suffern. Another really good game that I got a chance to see is the AA Mamaroneck at North Rockland. And North Rockland ended up winning 39-23. And I'm going to start with Mamaroneck. And the first person I want to address is their quarterback, Henry Mackey. I mean, he was 7 of 15 for 90 yards and a touchdown. Did have a few turnovers, which were pretty big. But I tell you what, he had 40 carries for 245 yards rushing. He really took the Mamaroneck offense on his back, and he had such a gritty, tough performance. I know the turnovers were killer. The big question with all these guys graduating with their quarterback, running back, all these skill guys, who was going to kind of carry the load? And he was that. He kept them in the game offensively for Mamaroneck, but the turnovers killed them. I mean, the offense had 395 yards total, but they had 4 INTs. They had a bad snap on a punt. That killed them. So, like, some big mistakes um, offensively and on special teams really put them in a bad situation. And defensively, for the most part, they slowed down their North Rockland's stud running back and made some huge fourth down stops. I thought the linebackers were very active in this game, but turnovers will kill you. TJ Smith's another one. He had 64 yards rushing and a touchdown. Jackson Davidson, he made some plays. Brian Alker had a receiving touchdown. Like they had some really strong performances, but again, this is the key: turnovers. Turnovers are a huge thing in special teams play. When you look at North Rockland, the offense wasn't really rolling. It kind of was similar to last week. They had they had slightly over 200 yards of total offense this time around against Mamaroneck. Had some fourth down stops, but what really impressed me in North Rockland, they made plays in each phase of the game, right? Similar to when they played Monroe Woodbury. Defensively, they held up. Made some big time plays. Special teams made some plays, and then the offense was able to generate enough to win the football game, and that happened here, right? So quarterback Hamilton, he was 4 of 8, 87 yards and 2 touchdowns. Again, making some big plays when he needs to. They haven't relied on the passing game a lot so far. It's been a heavy dose of running. And Savory, he had 69 yards rushing and a touchdown total. Right, not a huge performance, but there were some other guys who made some huge plays, and he is obviously the key. Every team's going to be scouting him number one, so other guys needed to step up, and they did. Ethan Farrar, he had a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown, also had an INT, so he was a good guy who made big time plays on both sides of the ball. Freddie Vasquez, another guy, I think so important for this team. He had 10 tackles and an INT, a couple of receptions. Jaden Harrison, he had that long touchdown reception, which was a huge one on offense, and then also 9 tackles. Tristan Veld has been very active, 16 tackles in this game. King St. Fleur, now this is back-to-back games of having an interception. This one was a INT near the goal line, took it 100 yards for a touchdown, really kind of sealed the deal for them in this game. Big-time play from him. Jaquan Johnson was very active. Ryan Joslow, another defensive back. North Rockland made some big plays on defense and special teams that turned this around. Big shout-out to North Rockland. Let's talk about another AA game. Scarsdale at Arlington. Arlington won 34-10. And I tell you what, at one point it was 14-10 Arlington. Scarsdale was keeping things around. They had, again, 12 first downs. They were actually starting to move the ball. They did a pretty solid job, and then Arlington really turned it up a notch. And starting with them, moving to them, Resigno, it was ugly out, right? So passing the ball wasn't, it wasn't a very efficient day passing, but they made some big plays. Had 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, 53 yards rushing and a touchdown. He was very good for them. Made the big plays when they counted. Mackey had one of the receiving touchdowns. Jordan had one of the receiving touchdowns. Davenport also had 71 yards rushing touchdown, including a long one. Jason Finn, very active on the defensive side of the ball with 8 tackles. Spalding with a fumble recovery, but really where they dominated was up front. And that's kind of the big thing. They dominated up front for them to run the ball. That's kind of their key. With Resigno and Davenport running the football with a big offensive line is going to be pretty deadly, and it sets up that huge matchup next week. Let's go to the next game. This is an A matchup. Yorktown at Clarkstown North. Yorktown won 47-13. It's a non-league game, and I'm going to focus in on Yorktown. And boy, Caden Gonzalez has had a very impressive start to the season. This game, 13 of 17, 5 touchdowns, 182 yards. Super efficient, dynamic, making big-time plays. Justin Price had 2 receiving touchdowns. Costello had a touchdown. Chris Constantine had a touchdown. I mean, he's spreading it around to multiple athletes. Their running back, Del Vecchio, had 52 yards rushing and a touchdown. Weissman, he had a rushing and receiving touchdown. I mean, these guys have athletes. I don't think Yorktown is given enough credit. They've been very explosive. And on defensive side of the ball, they bring a lot of pressure. Now they go up against Connor Duncan, Ryan Vogel, Jack Ferrone, all having been very active. Chad Bowen is another guy who just stepped up this past week, making a few plays on the defensive side of the ball. Yorktown is a team, I've been pretty high on them just before the season and starting the season. I don't think they get enough respect. A lot of teams are probably going to be looking at Yorktown, next week. They play Mayapack, right, at home. Mayapack coming off their big victory. A lot of people looking at Mayapack. Yorktown is kind of like that team under the radar, so keep an eye on them. Let's go to a B matchup. Edgemont at Pearl River. Pearl River won 48-0 here. The game was called because of injuries in the third, and I hate seeing that. The smaller schools, they always run into that kind of issue when a couple guys go down. The roster can be pretty depleted. So definitely don't want to see that. Hopefully Edgemont can rebound from that. But when you look at Pearl River, Jack Whalen was somebody who we wanted to see some, Coach Greer raving about his improvement in the offseason. And boy, I really liked this first game. He had 2 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. Spread the ball out. Dogden McLaughlin is a very reliable receiver, can make plays on both sides of the ball. He had one of the receiving touchdowns. Michael Squinilli had a receiving touchdown. So, they were pretty balanced. Sean Darwin, he had 2 rushing touchdowns and a pick 6. So, very impressive performance by him. Very active. Christopher Pond blocked a punt that Ben Responti had a recovery for a touchdown as well. So, Pearl River really answered the bell, pitching a shutout at all 3 phases of the game. Pretty dominant performance. Going to the Hudson Valley Football League now, Walter Panis at Port Chester. Port Chester won 21-12, and Walter Panis, their best player, Carlucci, pulling his hammy last week. I mean, him not being fully healthy is a disaster, for them, because he's probably the best player in the Hudson Valley Football League. Not having him is a huge blow to this team. And I tell you what, this is a huge win from Port Chester. They had a couple different guys score from them, Pauletti, Morrell, Sullivan. I thought this was a huge win at home to beat the champs of the Hudson Valley Football League last year. This is I think a real nice spark victory for them going 1-1. Let's talk about an A matchup. Clarkstown South at Somers. Somers won the game 42-13. This is a non-league game. I'm starting with the losing team. Talk about Clarkstown South. And they were up early. Somers had a rough start. Clarkstown South, there were some definite positives. And I know they talked about it at the game. They took a lot of positives from this. They did lose, right? So there's not too many positives, but I tell you what, there was a lot of inexperience coming into this game. I thought in the beginning they really matched it. They just didn't close the deal on a lot of these drives, and that's what really hurt them. And defensively, Somers has a lot of firepower, so they're definitely going to have to prevent the big plays, which they did not do in this game, at least in the second half or the end of the first half. So, those are the things that they have to definitely shore up. But, Clarkstown South, I think, is a team that will get better as the season goes along. Colin Holder, he had 2 passing touchdowns. He was 13 of 26, so 50%. I imagine we're going to see that improve. Jacob Tito had the 2 receiving touchdowns. He seems to be the most reliable target for them. But I'm looking to see Clarkstown South continue to grow. They showed in the beginning that, hey, they were matching blow for blow with Somers. So that was definitely impressive. Now, can you do it for 4 quarters, right? That's going to be the big question mark going forward. Now, looking at Somers, again, first 3 possessions was a struggle. They got down. Things were starting to wonder, like, did this game last week where they got pretty much robbed, is this going to linger for them? But they responded very well. And the spark plug is Mason Kelly, their running back, right? So he had that 60-yard touchdown run. He had over 100 yards, again, with 2 touchdowns. Also had a sack and INT. This is a young man who made an impact on both sides of the ball. He could be one of those guys that by the season end is the best player on Somers. He might be that right now, but we got Ryan Cole and stuff like that. But again, as a skill player, he might be. You also had a couple of quarterbacks making pass plays for him. Matthew Iglesias had a passing touchdown. He's one of those players that you can move around and do a bunch of different things. Max Sullivan had the passing touchdown. Luca Plogger had the receiving touchdown. Dean Palazzolo, and I apologize if I butchered the name, but this is that young man who now 2 straight weeks has had a big spark on offense. Keep that in mind. And that's when up front, I thought Somers really responded, was up front as well. You can see the dominance when they have those big guys, physical football players. When they're in cohesion with each other, they are a deadly force. So Somers with a big victory there, getting back on track. Let's go to the next game. Mahopac at Harrison. Mahopac won 28-14. And I'm going to do like the good and the bad. So let me give a lot of kudos over to Mahopac, who to me in the first half, I thought they were getting physically dominated up front. Had a really tough time defending the run for most of the game. But they took advantage of the Harrison mistakes. And that's a big thing, right? It was ugly out. They made some big plays in the passing game. They had 4 passing touchdowns, 3 of them to Kearney. One of them was a jump ball for a touchdown. And then the other ones, they executed on some poor coverage, right? And that's a lot of kudos to them for, again, taking advantage of mistakes. Harrison turned the ball over a couple times, and they took advantage of that. And they made some big plays in big moments. And Kearney deserves, he was really dominant at the wide receiver spot, 3 receiving touchdowns. He had also had an INT that took points off the board. So huge from him. And another guy I thought was really made a bunch of big plays for them is Varley, the defensive lineman. He had 2 sacks. He was very active. He was causing a lot of disruption as a pass rusher. That was a big victory for them. That was a big victory. Now go to Harrison, right? So I talk about the good, a lot of kudos to them. I'm glad I didn't hear about refereeing at the end of this game, which was great. So now moving to Harrison, and I got to say, this was actually more the most disappointing for me. And this is not an knock. I actually really respect Harrison. I think they're one of the most talented teams. I have them highly ranked on my A. I also picked them in this game, so it's not because of that. But I do think they have some serious talent. And this is like those big moments when you get a huge victory against a huge rival. How do you respond the week after? And it was a very emotional win, a physical win, guys getting beat up. How do you respond the next week? And in the first half, I was very curious to see what was going to happen. I thought Harrison came out strong. Now, they had a bad fumble in the beginning, gave Maybach the ball at their own 30 on like the second play of the game. So it was a disaster that led to a touchdown on 4th down on a jump ball, which you tip your hat to when a kid can make that play on 4th down. But after that, once you were dominating running the football in the second half, they just came out flat. They came out flat. It didn't have that same edge, that same intensity that you saw the week prior versus Rye. And this was probably one of the toughest film room sessions that the defense and offense had to go through because the turnovers killed them. In the second half, they were driving. They threw a pick in the end zone. Sometimes I feel like they were trying to outsmart themselves at times. And defensively, to me, they're very talented and they have some good coaches over there. And defensively, there was some busted coverage, right? They had a busted coverage at the end. The corner stayed in the flat. Safety didn't come over. Guy was wide open in the end zone. And then a couple 10-yard outs that went for 30-plus yard touchdowns, which, listen, I'm speaking harsh. I mean, it sounds harsh, but I'm a defensive coach. So when you watch that, it's just like, man, especially I coach DBs. It's just like, how could this happen, right? And I just feel the corners were a little bit too lax. Quarterback watching instead of getting into the man, kind of diving for the football. And those, when you're not there, you're kind of the last line of defense. There's no other defenders out there, right? So if you miss that tackle, you miss the ball, it's see you later. And that's what happened 2 times, right? So that definitely was a tough pill to swallow for me. Good news, though, non-league game, right? So non-league game, and I have a feeling you're probably going to see Maybach again. It might be at Maybach this time in the playoffs. So, again, definitely something to rebound. I do think Harrison will rebound, but that was a tough one. Citro had a rushing touchdown. I think Barcella had the other rushing touchdown. But, again, tough one for Harrison. But they go 1-1. Let's go to a B matchup. Another very interesting game. Ardsley at Nyack. And Ardsley ended up winning 23-20. A very fun game. Nyack is coming down again from A to B. Ardsley is kind of a team that's not talked about a lot either. But I'll tell you this. Let me just start with Nyack. This is a team that I thought coming in had to figure things out up front, have the size. They damn sure have the skill position. And you saw that in the beginning. They came out slow. But boy, did they pick things up in the second half. They almost came back and won this game. Tylen Blackwell-Williams had a passing touchdown. He was 13 of 20. Also had a rushing touchdown. Burgess had that receiving touchdown. The defense really picked things up, really was holding things down in the beginning and in the second half. Mateo Massey had a sack. Sean Clemens, he had over 100 yards rushing. He was really strong for them. But 4 turnovers, and that was really the death pill for Nyack. Those turnovers were so big for them. And Ardsley took advantage. I mean, they were down 12-9 in the fourth quarter when Nyack started to get things going. But then a big special teams play and an INT led to back-to-back touchdowns for Ardsley. And that's really what gave the momentum back to Ardsley. And the guy who gets the biggest shout-out is Michael Rendy. He had a passing touchdown, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 INTs. He was really, really good for them in this game. Ben Silverman, he had 75 yards rushing. Anthony Chenard had a receiving touchdown. Speckman had a sack, and big kudos to the guys up front. Up against a bigger football team, this was kind of the difference I told in the preview, and they came through. And that's a big reason why Ardsley won this game to go 2-0. Next game, another B game, Lakeland, 1-1 at Rye, who's now 1-1. Rye won 42-6. This was a league matchup. Lakeland, they had a really impressive win against Walter Panis, and going to Rye, who came off that really tough loss to Harrison. I was curious to see how Rye was going to respond. They responded pretty strongly. For Lakeland, Riley Sand, he had that receiving touchdown for them, and Kyle Gallagher had that INT, right? But Rye really dominated up front. And I talked about it on the preview show. is like Rye needs to get back to showing their physicality and their ability to run the football to help the passing game, which would be a great compliment because they have those skill guys. They have the quarterback. They got to be able to dominate, and they did. They rushed for over 270 yards. And so big kudos to the big men up front. Chris Iuliano, 134 yards rushing. Ramachandran, excuse me, 145 yards rushing. I do apologize again if I butcher your guy's name. Just had my head all over the place, guys. But these two guys were the big, heavy hitters behind that offensive line that was really pounding the rock. And Rye dominated both on the defensive line as well, causing a lot of issues for Lakeland that has that high-powered offense. So big kudos to Rye. Next B game, Albertus Magnus at Putt Valley. Putt Valley won 28-10. I've been impressed with Putt Valley's first two games. Ricky Meister is a guy who's been really, really strong. Had 150 yards and 3 touchdowns this game. Caden Glenn is another big play guy, but it's strong two-way player. Coach talked about he needs to find leaders on the defensive side of the ball. Caden Glenn was also very active defensively, had 2 sacks. Philip Oden had 5 tackles and a forced fumble. Nick Grippo had that kick return for a touchdown. Always usually have those special teams guys make big plays for you. He had one. Deshaje was another guy I talked about before the season, was a very strong player. In Frank's finest, he had a sack. Dylan Tucker had a sack and a fumble recovery. You're seeing guys make plays on both sides of the ball and special teams. Each phase making a play. Putt Valley's been very impressive. They go 2-0. Let's go to the next game, Double A, big rivalry game. The Yonkers Force at Yonkers Brave. Yonkers Force won 35-26. This big rivalry, and I said in the preview I thought this was going to be a much more competitive game than it was. Yonkers Brave really brought it, but Yonkers Force comes out on top, and it was really sparked by their wide receiver Angel Aquino. 141 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns on 6 receptions. Really just such a dynamic player, hard to stop when he gets into open field, and he can take a top off of defense. Fields was 4 for 4 with 2 passing touchdowns, also rushed for 159 yards. He was also very dynamic in this game. Corey Everett had over 100 yards rushing and a touchdown. Valerio was 4 for 6 passing. The offense, that 2-quarterback system, has worked pretty well this first 2 games of the season, and having those stud wide receivers really does help you. But I really like the effort Yonkers Brave played with. I knew this was going to be a much more competitive game. It was. They also made some big plays on the offensive side of the ball, but Yonkers Forest goes 2-0. Let's talk about another B game, Sleepy Hollow at Nanuet. Nanuet won 29-0 in dominant fashion. In Sleepy Hollow, they rushed for like 300 yards last week, but this time around had, 75 total yards on offense. So it was a struggle, and this was a game that had to be moved again, and the game took forever to get finished. So again, really difficult, but Nanuet's defense was really, really dominant, and they were running the football with authority. Big kudos to the offensive and defensive line for Nanuet, who are not huge, right? But they are scrappy and tough, and that's what Nanuet's been these last few years. But Max Felici had 2 passing touchdowns. O'Sullivan had the 2 receiving touchdowns. He's a dynamic football player for them. They had 5 players for a rush for over 25 yards, 258 total yards rushing, and guys like Duffy had 71. Colin Stemmerman had 60. Evan Moran had 26. Stemmerman had, 45, right? So, again, multiple guys running the football. That's going to be big for them, is to have multiple guys who contribute on offense. For the past couple of years, they were a one-man show running the football. It's good to see multiple guys get involved. Next game, this is a C in Hudson Valley Football League matchup. Poughkeepsie versus Haldane. Haldane won 29-8. Haldane goes to 2-0. Poughkeepsie, Jalen Lee had a touchdown rushing. When you look at Haldane, Gianchinta has had a really strong start to the season. 94 yards rushing and a touchdown. Also had a fumble recovery for a touchdown. And Ryan Van Tassel, he also had a passing touchdown. Those 2 guys have been really strong the first 2 weeks of the season for Haldane. Merrick Williams had 72 yards rushing. Murray had a receiving touchdown. Haldane has been very impressive to start off the season. They go to 2-0. Let's go to a C matchup. Woodlands at Dobbs Ferry. Big rivalry game. Dobbs Ferry won 27-0. When you look at Woodlands, Masai Campbell had 110 yards passing. Nas Covington, he was very active defensively. He had a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. Jaden Roberts was also very active defensively for Woodlands. Wanted to highlight that. But when you look at Dobbs Ferry, running the football, and there was multiple guys doing it, contributing on that end. So 91 yards rushing for McGoey with 3 touchdowns. Michael Guerrero had 47 yards. Kevin Hartnett had 27 yards rushing and a touchdown. And this defense forcing some turnovers. Drexel Lewis had an INT. Shemansky had an INT. This was a very well-rounded effort by Dobbs Ferry, controlling the ball pretty much and running at will. The next game, RCK at Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon won 18-16. I had Mount Vernon winning this one, and again, it's the size. I thought this game was going to be very competitive as well. RCK bring back a lot of kids. They did. Mount Vernon made enough plays at the end to come out on top, but this was a much more competitive game, and Mount Vernon did enough. Their size is a big factor for Mount Vernon. Let's talk about another game, Hudson Valley Football League, Tappan Zee at Ramapo, and Tappan Zee won 19-0. And I'm going to highlight Tappan Zee. Their quarterback, Tommy Kilvin, 14 of 19, 174 yards and a touchdown and a rushing touchdown. He was really good for them. I remember Coach talking about him before the season started. Someone's going to spread the ball around, and it's going to be on his shoulders to do that, and he did that well. Toifa had 72 yards rushing and a touchdown. Pisciano had 58 yards. Kevin Kulala had a receiving touchdown. So this was, again, Coach talked about spreading the ball around. They spread the ball around, and the defense came really strong with the shutout. Tappan Zee gets the win. The next game, let's talk about AA game, White Plains at Carmel. Carmel ended up winning 28-0. And before I dive into the actual game itself, do want to give a shout out to Coach K. I know he had to step down from coaching Carmel due to health reasons. Coached with Todd K last year. Me and my father did, and we wish him all well health-wise. It's really sad to see things get cut short like that, but this is a strong reminder, guys, that it's so much effort for players, both physically and mentally. It's also on coaches too. This is a stressful game. It really takes a toll on you, both physically and mentally. And stress can do a lot of tough things for you. So definitely wish him well, health-wise. It's always so important to you try to divvy up the stresses to your staff and stuff. And the staff did a good job in this one, kind of holding the boat afloat. And now we're going to see for the rest of the year, right? Tom Donahoe is going to be the head coach for Carmel for the rest of this year, and the rest of the staff running his system. It's going to be called differently, I'm imagining, but they're going to run that system, right? So we're going to see how it pans out for them. But they do have a veteran staff that has been coaching, have a lot of years of coaching. So we're going to see what goes on to them. But when you look at this game, Carmel really dominated up front. They had a dominant performance up front. They were really just much more physical, and we can expect that from a Carmel team. Running back Worlou had over 100 yards and a touchdown. Venables, he had 2 touchdowns and 83 yards. Even Tamba had a rushing touchdown as well. So you saw multiple guys contribute. The rush attack was really, really strong. And defensively, I mean, we talked about Nunez before. Didn't ask get past a lot. Again, it was an ugly weather game, so you're not going to throw, but he was 5 for 9. Defensively, they shut things out, and they were bringing a lot of pressure from the outside. The defensive line was really dominant up front, causing a lot of issues for the quarterback. Ryan Abel had an INT fumble recovery. Matt Risley had a fumble recovery, although he did get hurt, which is a huge that would be a huge injury for them. Not exactly sure what the severity is of that. But I tell you what, Mel came in, and the linebacking core did a solid job in this game. Now, it's definitely going to be revved up next week, but pretty good performance there getting the shutout. Let's go to another game. This was a rematch of the championship in 1B. Pleasantville at Byram Hills. Pleasantville won in dominant fashion, 42-10. And let me start with Byram Hills. And their quarterback, Accurso, veteran guy. He was 11 of 19, 95 yards and a rushing touchdown. Had 2 INTs, which were pretty big for them. Weiler had a field goal. Byram Hills really struggled to run the football, and it put a lot of pressure on the passing game. And at times, when you get so much pressure and you can't really get a balanced attack, you tend to force things. And that's kind of where the big struggles come for Byram Hills at times. You saw it even last year when they're trying to force things that aren't there, especially on deep concepts. But I think they're going to rebound. I think they're going to respond really well. Pleasantville just came out firing on all cylinders, and it's really led on the back of this young man we know, Daniel Picard. And I call him the magician. I call him Houdini. And he put on a show again this week. 4 touchdowns, 3 of them rushing. Also had a pick 6, 185 yards. A real dominant performance. He got his first carry went 65 yards, right? I mean, it was just a basic run play. He made 4 guys miss, took it to the house. It's just unbelievable sometimes. Again, everybody game plans against him, but executing that game plan is the difficult part. But he wasn't alone. Aiden Picard, he was strong as well. 115 yards and 2 touchdowns. Didn't throw a lot, didn't need to. Eric Coleman had a receiving touchdown. The offensive line, which was the big question going in, they really performed. And this defense, again, shutting down the run game, putting a lot of pressure on the quarterback, forcing a couple turnovers. So this was a very strong effort by Pleasantville. Surprised me. I thought there was going to be a little bit of rust. They came out dominating with the win. Let's go to the next game, Hudson Valley Football League, Spring Valley at Peekskill. This was another game I thought was going to be very competitive, and Spring Valley winning 13-6. Peekskill, I think, is going to be surprise some teams this year, and I'm going to start Armani Brown as the guy who can definitely open some eyes. He had a touchdown reception, 2 INTs, made some huge plays for Peekskill, but Spring Valley making enough plays, and defensively, again, causing a lot of pressure on you, making it difficult, can create a lot of negative plays, makes enough plays to win this game. Let's go to the next one, John Jay Cross River at Eastchester. Eastchester winning 27-0. John Jay Cross River, it was 14-0 at the end of the third quarter. The defense I thought was battling. I mean, I really thought they were grinding things out, making it difficult for Eastchester, keeping things in front of them. But they had 13 total yards of offense, right? The offense, which was very explosive the week prior versus Brewster, the turnovers and just the negative plays were too much to handle. And so eventually it just pulled away from them. Couldn't get things going offensively. When you look at Eastchester, really nice rebound, especially defensively. But let's start on the offensive side. Aiden Schultz, I knew as he plays more and more, he's going to get more and more comfortable. Had 66 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. This was a guy, again, dual threat guy. He also plays the defensive side of the ball, had an INT and 7 tackles. Joe Garba and Jaden Brunner both had rushing touchdowns as well. They were able to run the ball effectively enough. But to me, I wanted to see this defense respond after last week. And Vin Chiafone, he was very active. All right, I thought he was one of the best linebackers in the class. 11 tackles, forced fumble and fumble recovery. Alex Tito had 9 tackles. Sean Mannion, another really explosive guy out on the edge. He had a sack. So this defense responded very well. They get the shutout victory and was very impressive. Next game, John Jay's Fishkill at Ossining. John Jay's Fishkill won 36-8, league game. It all starts with the quarterback with them at Feliciano. Had another really strong performance. 19 of 26. Passed 26 times, 262 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, another dominant performance throwing the ball around. Noah Crouch is another guy, super active. He had 5 of those receptions for 70 yards. Super active on defense. He made a lot of plays for John Jay's Fishkill in a dominant performance. Let's go to another huge game. Tuckahoe at Bronxville. The CD matchup. Tuckahoe won 21-19. And before this matchup, Bronxville won 10 straight games versus Tuckahoe. This was a huge victory for Tuckahoe. Big kudos to them. I'm going to start with Bronxville, though. They were down 21-0 at halftime, and they had to claw their way. They just had such a slow start, put them in such a hole, but they clawed their way all the way back. Davis Patterson had a rushing touchdown. Connor Kenny had a rushing touchdown. You saw things started doing. Then they go down the field. They're running into the goal line. They fumble the ball, but they recovered in the end zone, and then going for 2, they get stopped. Just too big of a hole to overcome for Bronxville. They definitely want to get off to a faster start, but you saw the fight all the way to the end. But looking at Tuckahoe, big shout out to their quarterback. They came out blazing, and their quarterback, Colachicho, was really efficient. 18-24, 148 yards, 3 touchdowns, also 65 yards rushing. He had a great performance. Kudos to him. But Connor Bryce had 2 receiving touchdowns, and the other guy who deserved the game ball, Connor Banky, he had over 100 yards receiving and a touchdown. He had an INT, a fumble recovery, was a dominant two-way player in this game. Huge for them with that major victory going 2-0. All right, guys, 3 games left. We got Pelham at Brewster. Brewster won 14-0. There's another game that got delayed, moved back. But I tell you what, I was really impressed with Brewster's ability to dominate the trenches. They were dominant up front. They made a bunch of big plays, really grinding out drives, controlling the clock. That's usually what Pelham does, right? So Brewster gave them kind of a taste of their own medicine. Fox had a passing touchdown to Matt Thompson. Bari had a rushing touchdown. I saw Dylan make a nice play over to Colin Lamaro. But again, to me, it's defensively. They did a really good job of stopping the rush attack, and they were dominating, controlling the ball on the offensive side of the ball. Brewster gets a big victory there. Now let's go to the games that went on today. Briarcliff Hamilton football program at Irvington. They won 30-14. Irvington, they came out of the gates. They had a passing touchdown, Chris Gallant to Mason Cannon. And Mason Cannon an INT touchdown. They were up 14-2. And since that moment, Briarcliff Hamilton dominated. And it really was the domination up front that was the big difference here. And they were dominating, running the ball outside and off tackle. They really controlled the game after that aspect, scoring, again, 28 consecutive points. Really big victory for them on the road, winning 30-14. Finally, let's end it. Defensive slugfest here. Valhalla at Westlake. Westlake winning 11-8 in overtime. Right, that's such an interesting score. But this was a defensive slugfest, and Valhalla really loved Rob Foysette's game in this one. He really set up the first touchdown with his running. He was very active defensively. This is a guy who was all over the place. Brendan O'Neill had a rushing touchdown, but this defense really grinded against an explosive Westlake offense. I thought they did very well. Now, Westlake, they had a lot of penalties, a lot of miscues that really hurt drives. But you know what? They kept grinding, and they found a way to get into the end zone. Callie set up that touchdown with a big rush on fourth down. Then Chris Archiello had the rushing touchdown. Then go back to Callie for the two-point conversion, sending it to overtime. Anthony Negrelli had the field goal attempt, the go-ahead field goal attempt in overtime, and then the defense really clamped down. So I know the offense had a bunch of penalties, but the defense grinded the entire game. This was a defensive slugfest. All right, everyone. I know that was a long one. We went through a bunch of games. Appreciate you guys, as always. Running through a kind of me feeling not so great, but went through the games, tried to give as much energy as I can, and I appreciate you guys, as always. Signing out.